With Honor is a cross-partisan political action committee looking to get the next generation of American veterans to serve in the U.S. government. The organization backed dozens of candidates from both parties in last week's midterm elections, as the number of veterans in Congress has declined significantly over the last several decades. Wes Moore is the CEO of the nonprofit organization Robin Hood, which fights poverty right here in New York City. He's also a former captain with the United States Army's 82nd Airborne Division, All-American. Good to see you. Good to Airborne. Good to see you. All right, so talk to us a little bit about this Honor PAC and why you feel that it's so important for veterans to serve in Congress.
So with Honor is fascinating to me because part of the argument is the way we can deal with some of the toxicity that we see within our politics right now is to recruit and actively support people who they were brought up and they were trained in this idea of saying we lead regardless of the politics that surrounds us. And really what With Honor does is they say we want to endorse Republicans and Democrats. We want to bring people from various backgrounds, but the only common thread that they have is that they are military veterans and they pledge to be able to work with the other side in order to get things done. Right now, people are very frustrated by this level of not just confusion, but this level of stickiness and ugliness that our politics has now been able to exude. And the hope is that people who have worn the uniform and have worn the uniform with a core focus on supporting the country and its future are people that can help us break through that gridlock. You know,
it's sort of interesting tracking the number of people who are veterans in the United States Congress going back many, many decades. Yeah. I think in the early 1970s, you know, some over 50%, 60% of members of Congress and the Senate were veterans because of World War II, Korea, and the early years in Vietnam. Then that number sharply declined, and it has been declining. And I wonder now, I think you're starting to see veterans, more veterans, running for Congress because of our involvement in Afghanistan and in Iraq.
Absolutely. You have a whole new dearth of new leaders who are looking for ways to continue to serve. You know, think about it, where you had 45 years ago, 70% of Congress were veterans.
Right, yeah.
Right? Yeah. Now the number is 20%. We went over like a 50-year period where for every presidential race, at least one of the presidential nominees was a veteran, with the exception of the last two. So we've watched a steep decline of veteran participation within Congress. And right now what we're seeing, because we have veterans, you know, over 2 million veterans who are now veterans of the wars of Iraq and Afghanistan, who are coming back and saying, we're not done with our service. Our voice still matters, and we want to be involved in the current evolution and the current future of our country. And they're saying that politics is actually an important way to be able to do so.
And what I really think is interesting, and I wish more people were like this PAC actually doesn't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat.
That's right.
It's all about if you've served, they're going to try to help you get elected to Congress. So you have Republicans, you have Democrats, independents as part of that.
It's a really unique PAC because it's a PAC that actually is not an issue PAC. You know, there are a lot of PACs who say we'll support candidates as long as they back us on this issue,
right,
or as long as they back us on that issue. With Honor is basically saying we don't focus on that. We're actually not talking about the issue. What we want to focus on is that you go into Congress with the right attitude about what you need to do, that your job is to serve the country, that your job is to create legislation, bipartisan legislation, that you pledge to work with people across the aisle in order to get things done, and that you remember the things that we were taught in the service, honor and integrity and country before self. So this is not about a singular issue that they want their people to advocate for. What they're saying is, remember your training and lead in Congress with that in mind.
Let me ask you this, the counterpoint that some people will certainly make is and every American appreciates the service and the sacrifice that our fighting men and women have made, but are we underrepresented in Congress with teachers and scientists? I mean, I think it's generally assumed if you serve, well, you should be able to be a legislator. And we don't give that same kind of that veneer of respectability in most cases to teachers or doctors and scientists by saying, hey, you're a scientist, you should also serve in Congress, so you'll understand some of the issues this country is facing as well.
I couldn't agree more. You know, I had the joy of serving in the 82nd Airborne. I had the joy of serving paratroopers, but I also know that was not the only way to serve this country. You know,
hence Robin Hood.
Hence Robin Hood. Hence, I remember when I came back from Afghanistan, there were a group of people who were there at the tarmac meeting us. And they had American flags, and they were thanking us for our service. And I remember striking a conversation with one group, and I said, what do you guys do? And they told us, oh, we're teachers in North Carolina. And the only thing that I could think to say back to them was, thank you for your service. Like, what you're doing is just as important as anything that we were doing when it comes to actually protecting the future of this country. So when we're debating issues around education, debating issues around science, debating issues around healthcare, debating issues around infrastructure, I want teachers' voices at the table. I want people who were scientists' voices at the table. I want former CIA agents, their voices at the table. I want people who understand that service doesn't necessarily have to be a specific occupation, but that service should have been a way of life.
Let me just ask you real quick. I think what's interesting, too, is you've followed the Dan Crenshaw SNL, Pete Davidson thing, right? Dan Crenshaw was one of those candidates that was supported by the With Honor PAC. You saw, I think the country saw in that moment, a coming together of people who may not agree politically, but can agree on the sacrifice that Dan Crenshaw, I think he's a lieutenant commander in the Navy, and suffered the loss of his eye and probably a lot more that we'll never know. We'll never understand all the things that he and his comrades went through. And coming together with somebody like Pete Davidson, who sort of had mocked him a little bit. And you saw them bridging that gap. What did you think of that?
I thought it was a beautiful illustration of where we need to go. Where you know, first I acknowledge and admire Pete Davidson for when you make a mistake, it's important to own it. And it's important to say, you know, I screwed that up. And I shouldn't have said that, and I apologize. And it was incredibly big of Lieutenant Colonel Crenshaw of saying, and I forgive you. And watching that happen in front of all of us, especially at a time when the idea of simply apologizing or accepting an apology seems to be so foreign for so many people, to watch that happen amongst people, you know, in front of all of our sites, I think was a really important statement. Not even just about the importance of With Honor or the importance of putting veterans, but the importance of putting humanity back into the conversation and humanity back into the debate.
It's a great point. And finally, we just got about 30 seconds, but the candidates that With Honor endorsed had sort of mixed results in the midterms. It doesn't seem always as if everybody's on the same page. The rest of the country, when people try to do things that are kind of unique and interesting, what can they learn for the 2020 elections?
I think one of the big things to learn is that you have to build infrastructure around people. Simply running for office is not going to be enough. You have to build the infrastructure around it and help them and give them the tools in order to be successful when they do it. And I think the other big thing, though, that they can learn is when you watch some of the races, and some of the races that With Honor candidates won that they weren't supposed to win, is that if you stay core and true to service, stay core and true to the issues, and stay core and true to what that transition should be like and how you're going to advocate when you sit in the seat, then the results will then follow. And that, I think, was one of the biggest takeaways and how they're thinking about 2020 going forward.
And you, like we talked about earlier, you're applying those same principles to what you're doing here in New York City to help fight poverty.
Absolutely. I think, you know, the people who are closest to the problem are going to be closest to the solution. And I think for every single one of us, we've got to approach this work with a sense of urgency, with a sense of focus, and with a sense of connectedness. And that's what I think that we have to think about when it comes to our politics and just when it basically comes to our services and our supports of our basic people everywhere we go.
Former Army Captain Wes Moore, thank you so much for everything that you do. Thank you for starting Robin Hood NYC. We'll talk to you soon, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Thank you.